Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Okay.
That's good.
Had a bad week.
We did?
Yeah. Well, we went camping, but just before my computer decided to put all my files in the trash. I couldn't. When we got back, it took a couple of days to figure out how to get them out.
Oh wow! Like all the files in your backup drive, or your?
All the files. The backup drive didn't work either.
Oh wow!
Yeah, just all the files I'm working on, just thrown in the trash.
That's horrible.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm still restoring.
Oh, wow. You think you'll be able to get them all back, or?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes, they're all coming back. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I couldn't simply move them out of trash. I had to do some fancy stuff to get it out.
Wow, it's.
Anyway, recovery.
Yeah.
Okay. Boy. Also got a pile. Fairly fully recovered. Canoeing was not hard.
No.
The major thing is getting in and out of the canoe without falling in the water.
Oh, right.
So, anyway, I managed.
Yeah.
And what else? One disc failed. So.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, and also my portable has decided that all external discs attached to it are locked, no matter what you do.
Really?
Yeah, that's not resolved yet.
Wow.
So it's been a bad week.
Yeah.
Anyway. Boy.
We're still waiting for people. Here we go.
Okay.
Here's Jesse.
Yeah, hello, Jesse.
Hi.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. I spent several hours setting up. I've been training. We all have different tools for managing our projects and stuff like that. And I think I've fully transitioned now to something called Notion. I don't know if you know it, but it's basically a relational database plus like cool web interface or ability to embed stuff.
Yeah.
So, and in preparation of trying to manage everything that's going on and the academy ahead, I've really put a lot into that, and I'm happy with it. But I'm actually working on that still right now. So,
good.
That's my big update in preparation for everything that's heading our way.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like Airtable, maybe.
Yeah, I used Airtable. Maybe it's because I came into Airtable kind of in a weird way with a project that really didn't go anywhere that I never really got into it. But Notion is just this. You can. It's such a sandbox, and you can get really lost in it. But if you know what you're doing and figure out how to relate the databases the right way, and it basically uses, it's kind of, I think it's SQL based, but you're not typing SQL code. You can do these modified things in it, and then it's sort of a drag and drop interface, and you're making pages that you can embed the databases on. I actually would think it'd be a great resource for some of the stuff. I mean, I know we have all Google Colab and the Jupyter notebooks and all these other things at hand.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a good tool to have, and you can even make some of the pages public. So that'll be I'll leave it at that, and let everybody else who just joined.
Yeah. Thanks for the update. Ujjwal and Mayukh.
Hi.
You guys are here. Good.
Hello, sir.
Hi. All right. All right, I think we can get started then. So welcome to the meeting. And so I guess this summer is always a good time to catch up on things, but I know people are probably pretty tired of meeting in virtual spaces, and so, but that's okay. Thanks for sticking with us. Today we have Ujjwal and Mayukh, of course, that are going to give updates on their presentations or on their projects. We were going to hear from, I guess, Krishna Katyal, but I don't know if he's going to share his presentation with us today. Then I have some things I'll go over later. So I wanted to say that the update or the first period evaluations for GSoC are coming up this week. So it's up to me to fill those out. And like I said, it's not going to be too much. I don't think you guys have too much to worry about in terms of the passing or failing. You'll pass. You've been doing good work. And we've been doing a lot of interactions on Slack. So, and don't worry too much about like Mayukh sent me some things about a first period report. Google will send you guys a form, and it's merely a form. You just fill it out. It's basically going to be feedback on me. So hopefully you give me a good grade. I don't want to. Yeah, but so it's not a huge thing. But I think what Mayukh sent to me was something very useful in that he made a table of his progress by week, and so I think that's something that's good for the final report, because you're going to have to make a final report on this, and it's good to have everything marked off by week, and then you'll have to write a final report which will describe the project as well. So it's good to have that thing to look back on. So if Ujjwal wants to kind of think of it in that, I know he's been doing his blog posts and things, but to kind of, yeah.
Yes, I'm doing my blog post and I'm also trying to maintain kind of a table. We have to send a report like what we have done weekly to INCF as well. I got a mail from them.
Yeah.
So to send them, I have started making bullet points for the every week. That's one of the major tasks, and some sort of deadlines for that.
Yeah. I think though, yeah, we should keep the final report in mind too. And I didn't tell you this. It's a good time to tell you, I guess. But so the final report is usually something that you will submit to Google, but you also want to have a good presentation of things for the final. Like it'll be something that they have to, people can click on with one click and execute the program, and then there should be some documentation. So I think the documentation is good to have more of rather than less of. I've found in the past when doing these kind of projects, because it helps. Well, first of all, it helps like Google know what you did, and then future students know what you did, and then secondly, it does help the user and understand what to do with it. So so who wants to go first, Ujjwal or Mayukh, for their update?
I think
Okay, fine. Ujjwal can go first.
Okay.
I don't have much progress this week because I had exams.
Okay. So you all right? How are your exams going?
Yeah, the exams are fine. I'm just trying to, while my exams are going on, what I'm doing is that I've been trying to actually document everything. Like some of the notebooks, like they lack markdown, so I added those so I filled in those parts where there was no markdown. And other than that, I started creating this PDF which I sent you that Google Doc, which is basically just a table which sums up all my work. So I'll try to maintain that one so that I don't have a lot of so that it's not a big problem when the final evaluation comes up. So that I can make a final report easily from that table. So I just made that table, and other than that, what related to code, what I did was that you remember that LSTM model that we've been working on? The model which was, it was kind of working. I can just share my screen first then.
Yeah. Oh, I think
Yeah.
Visual already is working and stuff.
Yeah, I'll just share my window then. Yeah, so can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have been working on those LSTM models like long back where we were trying to predict the curvature of the cells with time, right? So then I started working on it again, and then this time I tried a few more like a better approach. Like this time what I did was that I smoothened the training data. I just removed the noisy points by smoothing it. As you can see, the orange curve is slightly smoothened version of the original one. So with this smoother data, it works like it gives me better predictions. And I tried using a smaller model actually this time. And this time, I don't know like why I have to actually read out like why did the smaller model work better in this case. So then that's that. And after that, like I just added some markdown as you can see, like which explains why I am normalizing the data to -1 to +1 and all that. Which should be useful as an educational resource later on, like for that DevoWorm Academy thing, right?
Right.
And other than that, like, and this interesting thing, like initially as you can see in this training curve, like initially the loss was at a very low point, but then it finds out a new minimum. Like it's kind of interesting. Like I was training this yesterday and I saw this, but with this new minima, it's working. Like it's actually giving me predictions. Then I plotted a few predictions as you can see. Like the further I go down the prediction line, the more unreliable it gets. But for the next like 10 prediction, it's quite reliable actually. As you can see, like yeah, it's like the green curve is the prediction, orange one is the actual values. So it's predicting quite well. And we can use it not just for the case that we're using now. We can. This is very portable. I can move it to any other kind of thing that we'll be doing in phase 2 or in phase 3. We'll see to that. Like we can port this to any kind of data, any kind of time series data, not just this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And other than that, like if you want to have a look, like this is the kind of a table that I've been making. Like in which like it's just coding pair and what I did, and like every week what I've been doing. I just keep updating this table every week with the links. Yeah, so this is just an extended version of my README which is there on my projects folder on GitHub.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That was a good update. Good luck on your exams. You think you did well, or?
It's still going on. Yeah, I've been doing well. Let's see, like that. There are 2 more left. Let's see. It's not like too bad. I'll get to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's good. Thank you. That was yeah. We'll have to revisit the LSTM model. I mean, obviously, we can, revisit it if it's, something that you find really useful. We can incorporate it more into the project. So I mean,
I just have to look for like some more good time series data. Like it can be used for movement prediction, or it can be used to predict any other parameter through time. There are a lot of use cases. So I am currently, other than that, I'm currently looking for some data which we can use, time series data which we can use for our case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's so much relevant, but they do have like different times, and they're not biological data sets, but they do have time series that you can download from different sources. So there's economic time series. So you have
no, I mean like in the epic dataset we saw that like we had a lot of like we could also predict the number of cells per given time using an LSTM. It's kind of possible. Like in the epic dataset, from the epic dataset we can find out that at each instance what are the number of each lineage cells, right? Okay. So we can format that data as a time series, then we can plot it out, and if we can format it out as a time series data, then we can just easily train an LSTM model which can predict into the future. Not very far into the future, but like for the next 5 or 10 seconds it can predict. Yeah. So that's pretty much like those are the possibilities. I can work on those things.
Yeah.
As soon as I get time.
Oh yeah.
I've been planning quite a few things like for phase 2. Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
After the exams, I'll start out.
Okay.
Like
Well,
currently, I've been just polishing things.
Okay.
That's been already done in phase one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to suggest that there are other types of data sets out there that you could use to train or to test the robustness of the model. But I mean, that's up to you how you want to do that. Um, you know, but I like that. That's a very good approach. Um, so, Ujjwal, do you have your? Want to share your screen now?
We share your screen. Just what is showing me? I'm sharing my screen. I think it's. Can you see?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah, so basically, the ideas I have discussed, so we have defined some color schematics for the what the portal we are making. So as you can see, like we have decided to like somewhat give a purple shade to the DevoWorm portal and to DevoZoo portal it's a blue green color. So I have tried like this is the website that it looks like earlier like there are different color pages which are coming all the way. So I have tried to mask these pages with the purple mask over the images so that images will still be going on. Backgrounds are still changing, but there is a mask, a purple mask for it. So like I need like a short simulation like if this is looking good because like I have not changed all the pages
Right.
just to make sure like this is a pink mask for that. This is the DevoZoo Devo method, so I have kept it like this the way it is, no mask for it. Then this is a DevoWorm Academy, so basically if you in the previous in the previous image or previous version, it looks like blue in color. So it is now in purple shade. I will change these. So is it kind of solving a purpose for like
Yeah, I
for the
think
color
so.
semantics?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we can decide like which ones go together, but I guess you could
So yeah,
try
so
a couple of different colors and see how they fit together, how they look.
yeah, so like I will do this thing for now. Like I will mask the pink mask, purple mask over the images so that background is still changing, but there is a uniformity and not pages are being flashed in eyes. Like the colors are changing constantly. These things can be controlled through this. So this is the update on DevoWorm AI. Then I have started compiling the pages for DevoZoo as well.
Okay.
So this is the DevoZoo. There's a page for DevoZoo. Like you can simply click on this button to view GitHub. So I have tried to make it as close as like what we have decided the color scheme for DevoZoo, that is blue green.
Yeah.
So there, as you can see, like the nematode Android data. So these are the data sets that are in Excel format. So like I was going through the data and I have seen like most of the data there, what we have is mostly in Excel. So like I also considered to converting it into CSV, but then I recognize like the people who are in additional sciences like biology and physics, they like to work on data which is on Excel because Excel is a great tool and it provides a lot of kind of functionality with the data in the Excel format itself. They don't have to write code for everything. Like if you have converted this into CSV, they are probably going to convert it into Excel back. So like most of data is also in Excel, so I have tried to keep it in that way. Some data which is not in Excel, which we will like as you can see, we have spotted the symbol for Excel if there is an Excel format file. If there is CSV, I will put up the CSV icon and so on.
Yeah.
So this is the microscopy movies that the nematode microscopy movies that are there in the website. So as you can see, I have tried to embed these movies. It's some of these movies in the web page itself, so that the person have an idea like what kind of data set is going to be. For example, you can simply play these movies here. So you can, before downloading or before going searching everything, you can have an idea like what kind of movie or what kind of data set is going to be. Same with these kind of videos. Then there's T-Squared 8 data, which is first is an Excel file for the Ambrogenesis. So this is the Excel file, and this is the README where you can find all the information. And most of the data, other than the video part, is on GitHub itself. The videos are there on Drive, and I think like this is a good idea to keep these videos on Drive because it is very easy to embed on the websites. If we are talking about hosting movies on GitHub, so we have to somehow get the raw view of that video, and it is very difficult to. I don't know if it is even possible to embed a GitHub hosted video on
Drive is better.
websites. So this is for the drive. So as we can go down, we can add more and more data from the DevoZoo, and this is the page where we can embed the latest Twitter feeds for the DevoWorm. Like we can embed the brandless Twitter feed for that, and orthogonal labs and OpenWorm. So these are the simple mission and research summaries that we have done. These are the microscopic tutorials. So like these are something. This is a website that I've built for DevoWorm initially, then I've changed it, but I think like this kind of fits for the DevoZoo. So these are the microscopy tutorials where, for if someone is interested, we can add some more tutorials like conversion of data formats like Excel to CSV and CSV back to Excel. What kind of data we can add tutorials for it. So this is the simple DevoZoo website. Data is very easy to update here. I'm trying to make an admin so that a person can simply add data, insert its links, and data will be added automatically in the given section. So these are the Devo nodes, Devo methods, and DevoWorm AI quick links. These are the home. So this is the progress that I have done on the front end and web portal part. Also, after this, I have started to working on the segmentation parts as well that we have to do in 4th week. So, first of all, like I have tried to first of all focus on the cells that are there inside the C.11 embryo. So, for this, I have used the cell pose model and Mayukh model. These are one of the good models for cell segmentation and image overlapping and image semantic segmentation. So I have tried to do some image. First of all, I have tried to make some masks, and then I have tried to overlap these images with the different colors so that we can identify the cells. So as you can see in this image, it is not very clear though, but you can see like the bright shining object you can see are the cells which are there inside each segment. So segment borders, borders are denoted by purplish blue, and the cell inside these are the bright color cells. So these are not so defined result, but I have used a lot of masks, and so I am working on it right now. Like I have worked on it for around 1.5 hours as of now. So in the coming week, I will definitely show some good results on it. Also, I don't recall, but I have seen a paper which works with C.elegans segmentation, and they have done a very pretty good stuff for the segmentation. Like their segmentation is really something like awesome. Like they have done really good job. So I'm not able to find it right now, but I will definitely share it over Slack. So this is the update from my side. As of now, like I'm also working on a README folder of my project, so it is not much right now, but I am going to definitely update it in the coming weeks.
Okay.
So this is the update.
The DevoZoo page. Yeah, that one. So go. Can you scroll through the Okay, so yeah. So the text is a little light. Is it gray or is it?
I have used gray primarily, but like I don't know, maybe this is the problem with like normally this text is pretty clear, I guess. But if
Yeah.
you want, like I can do it black.
Yeah, black letters on a white background is usually the most readable.
Yeah, so I will do the black. I have this right now. I use the gray, so I will do it black. These buttons that are used to redirect are in the same color shade that you have suggested, the dark blue green shade.
Yeah. So
So I will make these colors black.
oh,
These text black.
Could we also add another link for DevoWorm Academy in this, like on the top, like where we have all those options like DevoWorm AI and all those Devo methods.
Like
We should add one
I
DevoWorm
think
Academy.
DevoWorm AI is something the main page that of our website. DevoWorm AI Center.
Okay, so this is the main page, right?
Yeah.
This is the
So
main
this
page.
has this has the like
Yeah, we could use some other photo actually. Ujjwal, can you scroll up twice, like one more time? Yeah, in this one, like general segmentation model is nice. No, the other one. Yeah. Yeah, in this one we could use some other image because this is segmenting traffic and roads and cities. This is I think from the cityscape dataset, but we are segmenting cells, right? So I guess
like this is the
yeah,
this is the part where
it's just
we
my
are not
opinion.
focusing on. Yeah, this is not the part where we are focusing on the cells. It is just a general segmentation model that I have tried to make it tried to embed it. It is just a general segmentation model. You can segment any type of things, like a simple segmentation model, the one which is Krishna is talking about. Like he wants to work on it. I don't know what is the progress there, but this is the general segmentation model. And this image is a very famous image. Like this is on the mass RCNN when the film started giving
Exactly.
the
This looked
presentation
very
there.
familiar to me.
Yeah, so this is from there, so that's why I enjoyed it. But yeah, like sure.
Yeah, so this is basically for Krishna Katyal's work, right?
Yeah, basically he has
Okay, I get
suggested
it.
that he wants to work with.
Okay, I get it now. Fine.
yeah. So yeah, that's good. So then you're going to add in all of the different organisms and everything in here, just so you're up to C-score now. And you're saying that if you have things hosted on Google Drive that you can generate thumbnails from those.
Yeah, like these are not just the thumbnail; these are actually the video. You can watch the whole dataset video here itself. Like you can
Oh, okay.
clear on page out. So this is direct link to your Google Drive. Whoever person is viewing it, this folder will be shared with him. This video, and you can see the whole video here or in the website itself.
Okay.
Okay.
And so, how many organisms do you have up right now? Just like, or in this version?
I have found if I go to DevoZoo, so I have completed up to fruit fly, I guess.
Okay.
And after that, I have to embed these. So embedding these is not a very tough task. It will be done like by tonight. So I have just not embedded it because if you have any suggestion, like if you want to change something, so it will like become a lot of work to change everything. So
yeah, I think it. Yeah, that's good. Just go with what we have up there now. And then you would have each of these, and I don't know if I'm thinking about like having an image of each organism, but I think that's probably something we can do later.
Is it possible to make Ujjwal? Yeah, is it possible to make some kind of a guide kind of a thing, like for the students who would be coming next year to GSoC? So those students, like generally we headed to, like when I came, I had to head to the DevoWorm ML repo. Like there was this long README. Like there's a lot of resources in that README. So can you just convert that README to a like formatted web page, like for a good introductory web page for all the students or anyone who wants to contribute at all, like, so that they know what's going on in the organization.
We can add we can add a quick link here as well
Like
on the
like
main
something
website
for the
itself.
newcomers.
Yeah. We can definitely add a quick page here and on the main website itself for the GSoCers who
No, not
come
necessarily
and
GSoCers, like anyone who wants to contribute, right? So that they'll know what's going on. Like, well, we'll sum up all the work that's been done recently by the students or the researchers, and also we can also showcase some of the things that Vinay Bhaiya did last year, like that tool which he made, like it's on Heroku, right?
Yeah.
So all of that would be showcased there. Like it would be a good place for anyone to start. It's all there right now. It's all there, but it's kind of staggered. Like it's spread out.
yeah.
Like we have to
That
go
is the
around
main
a bit.
motive.
Like DevoZoo is somewhere, DevoWorm ML is on a readme. Like it's kind of spread out. So why not integrate it into one complete package in one page for someone who's coming here and someone who's new?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so basically, the point of making DevoWorm AI Center or Open Devo Cell is that we have to try to concentrate everything on the one page itself. As you can see, like these are some projects that we have done in the past, like digital basic areas. This is the C.Elements project that Venus has done in the previous year. So this is the model that we are directly going to integrate in this website. So yeah, this is the main motive behind what we are
So
building
I
right
think
now.
we can add one more page to this where it's like new to DevoWorm, then click here or something like that.
So we can definitely add a newcomer page here where we can just list
Like
out the
it would have
projects
everything from the
and
Slack channel link to the work that's been
yeah,
done
I'm
to the
getting it.
Google Slides of the meetings and the video, like the videos of the recent meetings and everything.
Yeah, I get
Yeah,
it.
so
Like
that
you
would be
are
a good
saying
place.
hmm, that can be easy, that can be done just so like what I'm getting is like you are saying we can add a simple newcomer page where the person who is totally naive can scroll it up. He can get what projects are being done right
Like
now,
so that
and
he know whether or not he's ready to contribute.
people, yeah, people who have he or she have to
There would also be contacts, like
contact.
if someone wants to contact
Yeah,
some person, if someone wants to contact you, he can contact you through that for the web part. For the segmentation part, they
yes,
can
yes,
contact Vinay Bhaiya. Yeah, like
yes,
through
yes.
Slack.
So
That would be a
and we
good
can
thing.
embed the weekly videos like we can like definitely do this. It is not a very big task. So if Bradley sir is okay with it.
Yeah,
Great, makes sense.
that's
Then we should
good.
add it to our GitHub issues, I guess, like in our GitHub projects.
I actually
I think we
just
should.
sort of did that. So
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, we can review that next. So, well, thank you, Ujjwal, for that update. That was good. Keep up the good work. We can keep going back and forth on the design elements and that. Obviously, we've had some feedback on that. So, let me go to the board now for GSoC. We haven't done that in a while. Um, I'm going to present my screen here. So this is the
I just put it as well. So
okay, yeah,
feel free to edit what I just put on there. But I was like, oh, I should put that for later.
okay, thanks. Okay, so this is our project board here, GSoC 2020 projects, and I'll give a link in the chat if you want to follow along. And there we are. So we have, this is the one I think Jesse added, ODC Introduction Material Onboarding for New Contributors Resource Page. That's number 33. So this is the one that we'll put that in, we'll leave that in to do for now. Let me see if I can assign it to Ujjwal. Make sure that we keep everything straight on here because we have, I think, move up a little bit. There we go. And then number 32, Open Devo Cell, Text Background Accessibility. create more contrast. And there's also Jesse, so thank you. And we'll assign that to Ujjwal. And actually, maybe we'll assign DevoWorm so that we have, like, make sure that's good. And then, so then we create pages, reorganize. That's also Ujjwal. I think that's work in progress. Integrate static files. I think we're sort of in progress on that.
That is mostly done. You can also place it in done.
Okay. Oh, and done?
Basic framework is ready right now.
Oh, okay. That's good. All right. And then how about setup framework here? Number 15.
Yeah, I have set up the Django framework. It is done.
And then, so then our movement tracking and prediction with machine learning, that's in progress. Assign something to Krishna. He's actually, he's been talking about doing a presentation. So I'll put in, maybe I'll do an edit on this and say, there we go for that. And then that's on hold. And then integrate cell tracking with segmentation. That's sort of not, we're not quite there yet on that, but that's for sort of like phase 2. Then the weekly blog post, so that's number 8. So that is Mayukh and Ujjwal. So are you guys coming along on that, obviously?
Yes.
Yeah, all of them are upright.
Okay. Movement tracking and we just did that one. Let's see. Add color palette. I think that's done, but we yeah, we'll probably have more to say about that. Actually, yeah, we can create another issue here. Optimize color palette, and then that's in here. We'll assign that one. Or create an issue. And then assign that one to Ujjwal and DevoWorm. Alright. And then if people have ideas about the color palette, share them with Ujjwal or share them in the meeting. We can do that. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. And this design evaluation is ongoing, so that's what we were doing just now. So that's good. I think that's good. Okay, Vinay said he couldn't see my screen. Are you able to see it now, Vinay? Or have you been able to see it?
Yeah, I just ended the call and I rejoined, so now I'm able to see your screen.
Oh, okay. Did you have any comments on the updates?
Yeah, I think both of them are good, but I would just have to. I did not get the enough time to go and look into the pull request this week, so I just have to look at the board once after this call. So after that I can get in touch with both of them if to see if they have anything technical to discuss or something like that. Apart from that, I don't have much to say right now.
Okay, that's good. So that's our, I think, our GSoC thing for today. Let's see. I wanted to go through a couple more things here in the last 20 minutes. I was looking through papers, and we do this from time to time, of course. And I should have put more papers up here. I didn't do it. My week has been kind of busy with a lot of other things, so. So this is, I've got a couple here actually that are kind of interesting. So why don't we go through them a bit? Let's see. There we go. So the first one is, this is actually pretty machine learning oriented, but it's unsupervised neural network models of the ventral visual stream. It's machine learning oriented, it's kind of neural network oriented, but it's based on sort of the human visual system. So I found this interesting. Deep neural networks currently provide the best quantitative models of the response patterns of neurons throughout the primate ventral visual stream. However, such networks have remained implausible as a model of the development of the ventral stream, in part because they are trained with supervised methods requiring many more labels than are accessible to infants during development. So they're talking about the development of our visual systems. It's our visual systems develop, of course. Some people argue that there's an innateness to our visual abilities, so we can see things sort of right out of the gate. We can recognize shapes or color contrast, but there's this development of the nervous system, of course, that happens after you're born for the first maybe year or two, and it involves a lot of different things. But what they're trying to do here is they're trying to make a sort of an analogy between the development of vision and these models of neural networks that can recognize images. And so here we report that recent rapid progress in unsupervised learning has largely closed this gap. So they're talking about this unsupervised learning technique that they're using that's sort of developmentally sophisticated or maybe inspired. We find that neural network models learned with deep unsupervised contrast embedding methods, which is this approach that they're proposing here, achieve neural prediction accuracy in multiple ventral visual cortical areas. And this equals or exceeds that of models derived using today's best supervised methods. The mapping of these neural network models, hidden layers, is neuroanatomically consistent across the ventral stream. Moreover, we find that these methods produce brain-like representations even when trained on noisy or limited data, measured from real children's developmental experience. So we also find that semi-supervised deep contrastive embeddings can leverage small numbers of labeled examples to produce representations with substantially improved error pattern consistency to human behavior. Taken together, these results suggest that deep contrastive embedding objectives may be a biologically plausible computational theory of primate visual development. So this paper is actually, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to build this model, this unsupervised model. They're saying, okay, first of all, that development is an unsupervised form of learning. In development, you're learning things and you don't really have, say, labels for them. You don't really have sophisticated language yet. You're still acquiring, information from your environment, but you're able to recognize shapes and somehow, start learning things like that. And so they're trying to mimic this with a neural network. And they're actually comparing it with what we see in, say, the developmental psychology literature. And they're making some inferences about that. So they talk a little bit about the structure of the human visual system, which is quite complex. It involves a number of different areas of the brain. So there are early visual areas like V1, and then there are other areas like the ventral visual area, inferior temporal cortex, and other areas like that contain separable information about object categories. And so those are, that's a higher level of processing, as they call it. And once you get the lower level features detected in V1, then that information is passed up to other areas. And these areas in the ventral system, which is the inferior temporal cortex and other areas, they do more sophisticated processing. So the idea is that the brain actually does the stepwise processing, and they're different areas of cortex. They're similar in terms of their anatomy to some extent, but they're also very different functionally. And they actually are different, like anatomically. It's just that they're all in the neocortex, more or less. So this is something that they're trying to, that they've been working on in the area of computational neuroscience for a long time. And so, but people really haven't accounted for development. And so, what they're doing is they're trying to figure out how you can build a model, and they don't use like something that's explicitly developmentally inspired. They're using these existing tools to sort of get at this issue. So people have made significant progress with this in an adult system using deep convolutional neural networks. So we know that those are inspired by neurophysiology. So those kind of networks are inspired. I don't know what they mean by directly inspired. I guess they mean like that the notion of a neural network is, and some of the convolutional aspects are inspired by neurophysiology, not necessarily the action potentials and all that. That's it's part that they kind of leave out of a lot of neural network models. But without getting too much into that, we can say, okay, this is neurophysiologically inspired. So they go through this and they talk about how task-based neural network optimization approaches have led to successes in modeling the human auditory cortex and aspects of the motor cortex. So this goal-driven modeling approach may be of general utility for modeling sensory motor systems. And so you can apply this as well to the visual system and object recognition. So without going too much farther into this paper, kind of talk a little bit about this. They talk about this model. They kind of go through a lot of the math. They review some of the unsupervised models that have been used. So unsupervised learning, of course, is a very hard problem in terms of, getting a rate of correct identifications and something that generalizes. So, you can read through this if you're interested. They do have a lot of really interesting work in this. I don't know if they have any figures here. But let's see if there's anything else that might be good to talk about. So they kind of come to the conclusion that it works. They talk about kind of some of the techniques that they use from neural networks. So as a mechanism of the learning rule, our work still uses the standard backpropagation for optimization, albeit with unsupervised rather than supervised objective functions. And so they talk about backpropagation being good for modeling, but not necessarily analogous to real organisms. And so a lot of the things we do in neural networks, I think it's good to remember this from time to time, are not really, we talk about them being maybe biologically plausible or biologically inspired, but the actual biological mechanism may or may not be very well, it doesn't necessarily translate well. Some of the things we can do in models aren't necessarily things that the way they work in the brain. Nevertheless, they also talk about better training environments being critical to understand like how biology deals with image processing, especially from a developmental standpoint. And so they talk about getting a better environment than your standard data sets that we use for analyzing data that, or testing models and training models. And so, let's see. They talk about things that are like features of development. So there's still many important components of real developmental data streams missing from SAYCAM, which is their training model or their training data set, including but not limited to the presence of in utero retinal waves, the long period of decreased visual acuity, and the lack of non-visual auditory and somatosensory modalities that are likely to strongly self-supervise and be self-supervised by visual representations during development. Moreover, real visual learning is likely to be at some level driven by interactive choices on the part of the organism, requiring a training environment more powerful than any static data set could provide. That's an interesting point, especially the point about multisensory integration and multisensory experience. So in my other group, we've been talking about this a bit, where it's not just vision that you have to think about. It's different senses being combined. And so a lot of image recognition and things like that, they operate sort of in a vacuum of vision, right? So you recognize some image as something that's visual. You make that analogy, but there are actually other sensory things that we use if we see an image, or even like symbolic things in the world that we use to sort of integrate that image and recognize it. So if I see a picture of a famous face, that face I can recognize it, but I also associate it with things, right? So I don't just recognize objects in a vacuum. I see a sandwich, a picture of a sandwich, I associate it with things. And if I see a sandwich embedded in maybe in a bunch of grapes, something that obscures it, that it's actually a sandwich, I associate it with other things. And those things could be, sounds, they could be songs, they could be smells, they could be, touching a sandwich. There are all sorts of things that we use to like integrate that information. And so when they say it's, so I would say cross-supervised would be a better term here, but we can talk more about that in another time. But we're working on some stuff with cross-modal integration, and I think that's a good area for like understanding a lot of processing information, especially developmentally.
Yeah, that's really interesting in terms of a lot of embodiment in general.
Yeah. I think that's a good. Yeah, we can talk about that like more in future meetings, or in my other group we're kind of getting on. You were talking about embodiment, which is where you have, we talk about the brain, but we also talk about the body and how those things interact. So I'm going to leave these here for now. These other papers. I just wanted to quickly move on to another topic that I have been thinking about. Yeah. So I presented a little bit on this in a talk recently. I'm calling these morphogenetic agents. And I don't want to like throw a name at you without saying that this is a work in progress. We've done some stuff with Morphozoic, which was Tom Portagee's invention. He's been working on these cellular automata that will recognize patterns or generate patterns that look like morphogenesis. In this case, what I'm interested in here is I've noticed the connections between morphogenesis and sort of pattern recognition. And so in this model, you have these agents that one's an observer and one's an emitter. Okay, and so the emitter produces different patterns. And I'm just using these circles as sort of a shorthand for some autonomous thing, right? Then the observer is this thing that reconstructs the pattern that's the emitter is producing. So they're perceiving this pattern and they're processing it like you would if you looked at patterns. If you looked at a Where's Waldo picture and you wanted to find like Waldo, or one of those eye things, or you have to like, I don't know if you remember these, but you look at a pattern and there are things in the pattern that pop out. That's the sort of idea. So you have an emitter and you have an observer, and the emitter is producing a pattern. The observer is reconstructing that pattern and making sense of it. And so the tag here is, what is the relationship between morphogenesis and perception? And so we can use this kind of model. And the benefit of this kind of model is that you can treat this problem as sort of a predator-prey or coevolutionary relationship. So, it's like maybe a competitive game or a cooperative game even. where the emitter and the observer either are two different, or maybe it's like a hare and a lynx, like they would have in a predator-prey relationship. So the hare would be the prey, which would be the emitter. The lynx would be the observer, which would be the predator. And the predator is trying to eat the prey, but it has to recognize the prey first. And so if you have that kind of relationship, you can, evolve, or you can let these two things adapt to one another. And, the emitter can say, like, conceal its pattern, and the observer can, like, find new patterns and figure out where that concealment is happening. So there are a lot of different things you can do with that. So that's the one thing you can do. And then the other thing is you can combine these two, emitter and observer, into something called a morphogenetic agent. And so this is where you're linking, the sort of the evolution of shape, or the creation of shapes, with attentional mechanisms in the observer. So the emitter is creating these morphogenetic patterns. The observer is decoding them. And then the emitter can also, perhaps, and I haven't worked this out, serve as like a way to decode, work together with the observer to decode patterns. So it would generate patterns, and the observer would use that to reinforce its ability to observe patterns in the environment. And so this is kind of an idea here where, in this case, you have a pursuit game where the emitter is producing a pattern like this, these stripes, and the observer is trying to figure out what those, they're trying to match the stripes. So in this case, the observer isn't getting it, so they think it's like some sort of checkerboard pattern. But in this case, the observer is able to match what the emitter is producing and recognize it as something that is a morphogenetic pattern. So that's kind of the idea behind this, competition aspect. Sometimes the cryptic expression of a pattern is good for the emitter's fitness. Sometimes it helps to train the observer. So can the observer recognize different patterns? That's one question. But the other question is, what is the minimal form required for recognition? And so in this case, I made the kind of thought about a thought experiment here where we draw an elephant using a genetic regulatory network. And we haven't talked about GRNs, but you can use those to generate shapes and things like that. But say we draw an elephant with a GRN. How much of the elephant do we need to draw? What kind of detail, what kind of shape similarity do we need to have in order for the observer to recognize it as an elephant? So in this case, we have 9 modules, each encoded continuously by an express binary gene. So this gives you a state from 0 to 1. How many modules can be shut off and still result in something recognizable as an animal? So we have these modules that represent different parts of the elephant, like an ear, or the trunk, or the head, and they all sort of encode this shape. So the idea is that the GRN is producing each part of this elephant. But say we shut off one module, say we get rid of the head, and we just have a trunk here, and an ear, and a body. Could the observer recognize that as an elephant? And the answer is we don't know. But that's the question we'd be asking. And the answer would be, how accurate must the form be to be able to get recognized? So how much of the GRN expressing elephantness do we need to have to get the elephant recognized? And so we can obscure the elephant in various ways, and this encoding, will help us along that path. The encoding can be highly accurate or not accurate at all. It can just be like a block model of an elephant. And the emitter, we can test the emitter to see if it can recognize that. And this is sort of the idea about the brain behind what's going on in perception. So instead of, we can use like a neural network, but we can also use these nearest neighbor models. And this is sort of like a cellular automata where you have these nearest neighbor interactions amongst this spatial array, or the cell array. And the idea is that it would reproduce these shapes in the brain. So you would have, this would be a case where there's random activation, and then eventually it would observe patterns in the environment, and then you would end up with this striping, which would be like something that it would observe a lot of in the environment and replicate, and then be able to recognize it in the environment. It's sort of a crude way of doing sort of pattern recognition, but it also allows for things that are maybe less labeled or less, defined to be recognized. And so one way you can train these observers is through Moir patterns, which are these patterns where you take two sort of, we have concentric circles in this case. You take two, say, sets of concentric circles and you intersect them. And when you intersect them with movement, you move these two sets of concentric circles across one another. They make these interference patterns, which are actually quite, there's a lot of variation in that pattern, and it's very rich in terms of its content, its information content. So we can use these kinds of things to train the model, and we move these concentric circles across each other, and you can get these patterns. And so then, finally, to sum up here, we get observer effects. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the, observer problem in quantum mechanics, where you have you observe this, you have light going through a slit, and then you observe on the other side of the slit, and you see this interference pattern. That's kind of what we may expect here, and this is kind of interesting because it gives us really complex patterns that we can observe, and we can watch how the observer analyzes them. I should say you can also use a neural network for this as well, just to look at how these effects are decoded and classified. So that was pretty. It was a pretty quick overview of that work, but I just wanted to show it to people. Just as a, if people are interested in talking about that more, I'd be happy to talk about it. There's much more here to talk about. Obviously, I just gave a 5-minute thing. But.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a lot of ties into what I'm, other things I'm interested in, even in the sense of, I know it's not really directly related to affordances per se, but because I've been working on that concept in general, it's like, thinking about the elephant itself, it's like what part of the elephant provides the most identification or interaction in terms of information, even just understanding, okay, well, it has 4 legs and it looks like a large thing, that kind of creates a whole class of assumptions or ways of interacting with it from an observer, and what parts can be obscured and what parts are. There's a particular part of the elephant space. If you saw it from any angle, you'd have a really good sense of okay, yeah, that's an elephant, and that conveys a certain amount of meaning. But at different parts, it's less so. So, I think that's all very interesting stuff.
Thanks.
Is there a specific? Are you? I forget, because I know this came up before somewhere, or in reference to other things. Is there any sort of work being done on that concept of morphogenic agents, or?
Well, I mean, this is something that I'm kind of putting together. The idea that I have is pretty much if no one else has done anything. Tom Portuguese has been doing some stuff on what he calls morphogenesis. And so he's been looking at things like bee colonies and pufferfish nests in terms of how they're shaped and how they might be put together. But I mean, there might be some work in the artificial life literature on people looking at visual perception, but that's usually not their main interest. So I don't think people are doing too much. I think they're maybe people are a lot of the machine learning people are starting to say, well, maybe we need to understand visual perception a bit better because we're kind of dumping model into a machine learning algorithm and we're coming up with patterns, but we know that the visual system is much more sophisticated, but there's no understanding how that actually would work in an artificial system.
Okay.
Yeah, there's this subfield called, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this subfield within deep learning. It is called like adversarial attacks. Like what happens in that is that we just alter the pixels within the image just by a very small value, but in a very, but in a certain way, so that like it misidentifies the object. Yeah. So what happens is that even though a human can still look at that picture and say that yeah, it's a panda, but if you show it to some a deep learning model, that image has been like if that image has been tampered with in a very specific way, then it misidentifies it. Like it's very interesting the way like it does not look at the bigger picture. Like our human mind is still not prone to these kinds of things, while the model is.
Yeah.
Like most of the models which give 99 98% accuracy in recognizing something, like one best models are guessing to know. But if you feed them image where just a pixel is like altered, so you can see like it is not able to predict this that it is an image or not. So this is a kind of
actually we don't even need a very sophisticated thing for this. What happens is that we can just backpropagate on the model itself. Like what happens is that when we look at the model, like when we pass the image to a model, like there are certain activations. So if we can look at those activations and like alter the models, alter the input image in such a way that we make the most difference within those activations, then we can actually just alter it without making minimal visual changes within the picture itself. Yeah. I've been working on that before GSoC actually, so yeah.
Was that good, Ujjwal?
So this is the this is the kind of thing like Mayukh is working with. This is the kind of thing like which is being in the research in lots of labs around the world. Like the model which are giving very good accuracy, like 98% accuracy, they are still not able to identify the image which is just altered by 1 or 2 pixels. So like to us it will look perfectly normal, like nothing has been changed. But if we are feeding it to some model, it will totally be confused by it, like what happened. So like, you can somewhat relate it to kind of overfitting, like it's not actually overfitting, but you can get a sense of it, like what is happening. So when we overfit some model, so if we give data which is just outside the confidence range or something like, so it totally alters the result and it is predicted very off chart. So this is something that is happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Well, on
Well,
top of that, this thing like what happens sometimes is that even though it's nothing, like sometimes what happens is that we can modify a black image. Like they suppose we started with the image full of zeros, that's black, right? We can modify a black square with, like by modifying just a few pixels within that image, we can actually make it look like a certain object to the model. Like I can show you an example right now if you let me present.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just show you an example.
Let me do
like,
this.
Okay.
Let me take that off. There we go.
Yeah. So can you see it?
It's coming up, yeah.
Yeah, wait. So it's coming up. Yeah. So wait. It's not here yet. What happens there is that like there are certain like is that I made this thing called adversarial blocks. What they do is that they don't look like anything within the game. Like I think you guys have heard of that game called Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
Some of you might have heard. Yeah, so within that game, I've been working on some stuff in that game. First, like initially, I just made some basic object tracking stuff, and after that, I went on to make these kinds, like as you can see in this photo. Can you see?
Yeah, I can see.
Can you see this photo, like where I visualized? Yeah, initially it was classifying this image as a chicken. Then I added this small amount of noise. This is not exactly noise. This is actually, like you can see the mathematical formula above it. It's using this thing called fast gradient sign method. Yeah, so when it's being like, I'm backpropagating on the image to maximize the loss. That's the best summary I could give in one sentence. Or like, I'm backpropagating on the image to maximize the loss for a certain class. So then it backpropagates and then it modifies it to look like a pig, even though they're visually very similar for us. But for the model, it's now classifying it as a pig 75%, which is like very strange. And also I could make these kinds of adversarial blocks. These blocks like these, they don't look like any animal, right? But then if I backpropagate on the black image to make it look like a panda, it gives me this kind of a square. So then if I actually use this in the texture pack within the game, then it actually starts misclassifying. No, that if is not there. So it actually starts misclassifying this picture like as a panda within the game. Yeah, so that's something which I found interesting. I think it's there. Hold on.
Wow. So that's Deep Chicken Savior.
Adversarial block. Yeah, I think it's this.
Is that something?
Yeah, it's called Savior because there's this other project where I use object tracking. Yeah, it's actually there are two projects. Like then I have to explain. Like there was this project first in which I just made some stuff where it will automatically track a chicken and will kill it in Minecraft. Whenever it sees a chicken, it tracks it and kills it, as you can see.
Wow. Yeah.
You can see it, right? And I can make it kill any animal within Minecraft. Yeah, so that was it. And then I thought, why and this tracking was done using a neural network, like the tracking and classification.
Right.
Then I thought, why not make something which breaks this tracking? So I made Deep Chicken Savior, which is made to confuse Deep Chicken Terminator. I took that model which I trained on Deep Chicken Terminator, and I tried to find a way so that I can break that tracking. As you can see, like before, like it was tracking pretty well. Like on the before GIF, it's tracking the chicken as a chicken, and then the pig as a pig. But after that, it's tracking that chicken as like this is the perturbed frame. Like every frame, like there's minor modifications which are being made to the frame, which I'm making it think like the chicken is a pig or tail. Like there's a misclassification happening with the chicken, specifically with the chicken.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been doing. Even though, wait, let me show you the GIF. I think it's there, but it's not loading up for some reason. It's not loading up. Let me just check on my files. I think it's there. Hold on a second. Still somewhere. Yes. Yeah, so yeah, this one. I'll just zoom it in. Like you can see, right, this is a black block, which I just used that train model and I backpropagated on a black image to make it look like a panda.
Yeah.
Instead of backpropagating the model, I'm backpropagating the image by freezing the model. Okay, and then I'm modifying the image such that it looks like a panda, and then when I use that photo and just make a custom block inside Minecraft, then that frame model which was there in Deep Chicken Terminator thinks that this black simple block is a panda. So this was kind of a thing like which I've been doing before GSoC. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I kind of deviated from the topic a bit, yeah, but something interesting.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah.
Vinay says, "Wow, great work, Mayukh. It was a pretty fun thing." Yes, that was very good. Thank you.
Yeah, this was actually done before, like, it was pretty much for fun, nothing else. I don't see any use tracking and killing chickens within a game, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but it was fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, everyone. Thank you.
I've been actually planning to make a segmentation model within that game.
Oh yeah.
Personal, like, project and everything.
Yeah.
Like an image kind of a model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for attending today and contributing. And if you have any questions about anything, let me know offline on Slack. Otherwise, talk to you next week. We have, again, GSoC updates, and then if anyone wants to present anything, you can if you want to volunteer. I don't know if Christian is planning on presenting. Maybe he'll present next week, but we'll figure out what we want to do for next week. So have a good week.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
You're welcome. Bye.